Most people love animals. They're cute, cuddly, and inspirational. But some of them will eat you alive, and these are 5 instances where animals actually ate humans. I love animals, and I'm sure you do too. And most animals are wonderful to study, to look at, to view, or even to keep as pets. And almost every single animal on the planet does not see humans as a source of nutrition. And there are documented cases of animals eating a person or several people. So today, let's go over 5 of those exact instances. Starting off, number 5, Grizzly Man. Timothy Treadwell. This is probably the most well-known one on the list for sure. Timothy Treadwell was known as Grizzly Man. And this is a gentleman who is from New York originally, residing in California near the end of his life, but half of the year he couldn't stand to be without bears. He would go to Alaska every summer from 1990 all the way until 2003. And his favorite bear species, brown bears, often called grizzly bears. These are some of the biggest animals on the planet. One of the biggest predators you can ever imagine. Timothy has been enamored by bears since he can first remember. But in 1990, he made the choice to go out there, and for the next 13 summers, he spent almost completely alone just with bears. And this man wasn't taking photos at arm's length. This man was cuddling these bears, getting to know these bears, learning about their habits, learning about their habitat, and forming a bond with them as individuals. Year after year, he knew these bears, different bears, the same bears. A mother bear would give birth, and that bear would become Timothy's friend the next year. And Timothy documented this on videotape and in his own personal diary, which was found later, unfortunately. In Alaska, summer ends early, so usually by the middle of September, Timothy Treadwell is on a plane and he's on his way back to his home in California. But in 2003, he decided to leave a little bit later and he went to go change his flight. He wanted to spend just a little bit more time. He changed it by a week, and now we're getting into the beginning of October. This is a time where Timothy has never been in this part of Alaska before. This is a time right before bears start to get ready to go for hibernation. Hibernation is basically when bears sleep for the majority of the winter. They eat as much as they possibly can so that they can sustain the winter without eating. This means they are ravenous. They are aggressive towards food. These bears aren't going to be defensive towards humans like normal. They will actually be aggressive and try to eat anything in a campsite, anything in a vehicle, any form of food that they can see. And sometimes, if there's nothing else, the human might be what they see. Now, it should be noted that bear attacks as a source of food, humans being the source of food, is very rare. And in this particular park that Timothy was in, there had never been a reported bear attack that killed a human. And this particular year in 2003, Amy, Timothy's girlfriend, showed up and came with him. Amy said in her diary that was later found that she felt really uncomfortable. She wished that she could leave. She didn't want to be there. But Timothy felt very comfortable until the very end of the season, because when bears start to go down for brumation, sometimes newer bears will come into the area if there's more food. So the bears that Timothy knew were going down for hibernation or getting ready for hibernation, really slowing down. And new bears that he didn't know, that didn't know him, and they didn't feel comfortable around each other, started to come in to that area. And sometime on October 5th or October 6th, Timothy drew his last breath. There was a bear that had been photographed and been videotaped by Timothy the day before, looking for a dead piece of fish. This is thought to be Bear 141, which eventually on October 6th was tracked down, killed, and found to have parts of Timothy inside of him. There was a collapsed tent where Timothy and Amy were sleeping. Timothy turned a video camera on to capture the last moments in audio form only of him screaming, crying, Amy telling him to play dead. But when a pilot showed up in the morning, all that was left was pieces of both of them. And some of those pieces were inside of Bear 141. In our 4th entry, reticulated pythons, one of my favorite snake species of all time, one of the most beautiful, majestic snake species from Southeast Asia. These snakes are considered the longest snake in the world, with anacondas taking the heaviest snake. These animals are nowhere near each other. Southeast Asia, Thailand, Indonesia, places like that. That is where you're gonna find reticulated python. And amongst reticulated pythons, you've got the large mainland reticulated pythons, and then the insular reticulated pythons, like the ones you see sometimes behind me in this enclosure, that are going to be much smaller. Indonesia is comprised of many islands. Some of them are great tourist destinations like Bali. Some of them are great destinations, well, if you were born there and want to become a farmer of something like palm oil, like Sulawesi. And Sulawesi is one of the islands where you find the biggest reticulated pythons in the entire world. This is a place with lots and lots of food, which is why the reticulated pythons can get so big. One of the things that is almost never on the menu with reticulated pythons and never documented until 2017 are humans. Humans make terrible objects for reticulated pythons to capture. They're just too big. Even a reticulated python over 20 feet, if they digest a full-size man, it's going to take days and days and days before it's able to move with any sort of agility again. The meal is just too big. But on March 25th, 2017, early in the morning, Akbar Salubiro set off to harvest. He lived close to a palm oil plantation where he worked, where he went to harvest in a very remote village of Sulawesi, Indonesia. But Akbar never returned that evening as he was supposed to. This is a hardworking man from a hardworking village where at this time of year, the men would leave early in the morning and come back at night. And as night fell and the hours passed, Akbar never showed. This caused concern for his wife, his family, and his friends, and soon a search party came out, was looking for Akbar, and then the next morning, police were notified. More searching was done, and they could not find Akbar, although there were reports that night that he disappeared of a man screaming far in the distance. Later in the day, early in the evening, on the 26th of March, the day after Akbar went missing, a very large reticulated python was found in Akbar's very own backyard. This animal had a large lump inside of it, so big that the animal could barely move. We're talking a 21-foot animal recorded at 7 meters. This is close to topping out one of the biggest wild reticulated pythons ever spotted. And inside of this python, they feared the man who had gone missing was inside. And there's only one way to find out. After the snake was dispatched, he was cut open on video, and to the shock and horror of everybody in that village who was looking at what was happening, Akbar was found. It should be noted, although through the course of history, I'm sure reticulated pythons, especially in rural parts where there really isn't any record of something like this happening, there have been people eaten, usually smaller, children, elderly, something like that. In recorded foreshore history, this was the first time a reticulated python, a wild reticulated python, had consumed a full-grown adult. By chance, the next year in 2018, also in Sulawesi, a 54-year-old woman was found inside of a reticulated python as well. And an island not far off, Sumatra, again in the country of Indonesia, another 54-year-old woman was found in 2022 in the belly of a reticulated python. For our third entry, I want to keep up with reptiles. Something interesting is these are some of the largest animals in the world, but it can also be the smallest. But there is no denying that a Nile crocodile is one of the most formidable predators in the entire world. In a Nile crocodile's range, the country of Burundi, a small landlocked nation near the center of continental Africa. And on the southwest border, a serpentine-like lake that you can find animals just like this. Burundi is a great place for reptile life. Small lizards, giant monitors, big snakes, and little snakes, all the same. But one thing you'll definitely find in some of the waterways are Nile crocodiles. Nile crocodiles, there is no doubt, are some of the biggest reptiles on the planet. Very large in the crocodilian family, big teeth, big jaws, big bodies, and very formidable tails. Capable of swimming very quickly and biting you even quicker if they think you're prey. In this area, the normal diet of a crocodile are aquatics, things like fish. Also, if they get larger, buffalo, antelope, even sometimes small hippopotamus. But there is one Nile crocodile that is the most infamous man-eater in all of history, Gustave the crocodile. And that is the animal that has eaten over 200 to 300 people. Estimated at over 20 feet long and up to 2,000 pounds, Gustave has been elusive. He's been seen, but he's never been captured. And what a warrior Gustave is. Every crocodile that's been cataloged has a set of markings, and some of the markings on Gustave on his shoulder blade are very deep bullet wounds. This is an animal that they're estimating is between 60 and 70 years old. An animal that has made a career out of eating humans. And don't forget, Nile crocodiles can go months without food, especially if their last food item was large. Which means that if this animal truly has eaten 200 to 300 humans, that means that's one of his favorite things to eat. An animal this large won't be as agile as its smaller counterparts, which means eating things like fast fish are out of the equation, which means that hippopotamus that are much smaller, although very dangerous to him, are an option. Buffalo, again, dangerous to him, are an option. But what is not dangerous, especially when unarmed, are humans. We are very soft and we are very slow. And although a very notorious creature, he has not been spotted since 2009, and although there is reports that in 2019 he was killed, there has never been any photographic evidence and no proof. Gustave might be still out there. Moving away from reptiles at number 2, I want to talk about the colonization of Africa. In the 1800s, England was well underway colonizing parts of Africa and building infrastructure for their new lands. In the late 1800s, building a railway in Uganda, Kenya, and beyond was at the forefront and a very important piece of what England was doing. Looking at the lay of the land, in 1898, it was time to build a bridge in Kenya. A bridge spanning a river with, again, lots of crocodiles, but it's not crocodiles that ate anybody in this story. This bridge took thousands of men, mostly Indian men. As you know, in that time, India was colonized and was owned by England. They shipped over some workers to Kenya, thousands of them, and they created a camp all around this bridge site. And in this camp, at night, something terrifying happened. One by one, men went missing. And when they were found, it was in pieces. And the rest of the pieces that couldn't be found were inside of lions. In general, lions will hunt in groups. It'll be females that carry out most of the hunting. However, sometimes they will hunt in pairs. And in this instance, 2 lions that look like lionesses, but were in fact giant over 9-foot males without manes, were the reason that these men were disappearing. Lions don't prey upon humans unless they need to. They are defensive against humans if necessary, but seeing them as a food source is much too challenging in compared to all of the other options that they have, unless they need to. You see, humans are very slow and we are soft. Our bodies are much softer than a gazelle, certainly a hippopotamus or a rhinoceros. We are one of the easiest prey items to digest. Starting in March of 1898, men started to be dragged from their tents, and they knew almost immediately that it was lions, or at least one lion, that was carrying out these attacks. John Henry Patterson was the man for the job. He showed up right before these lion attacks started to happen, and it took him nearly an entire year to solve the issue. From March all the way until December, attacks were carried out, and there was a break in the middle where the lions went to a different settlement. But once they had come back, John Henry Patterson knew he had to do something, so he did. Eventually, he killed both of these lions. The first one on December 9th, taking almost a dozen shots from a rifle, from 3 different rifles, in order to capture. 20 days later, on the 29th, another lion was shot, and that solved all of the issues, and this bridge, which had halted production because of this, could then resume. The lions were turned into rugs, and 25 years later, the hides were brought to a museum to be put on display where you can see them to this day. Lions are terrifying, but for our number 1 entry, I want to talk about a much more formidable and terrifying creature, the bear. Brown bears aren't just in North America and Alaska, like we talked about in our first entry. There are also European and Asian brown bears that can be found in parts of Japan, which is where the story takes place, in late 1915. Sankubetsu is a small village, a hamlet 18 miles inland from a major center on the west coast. Keep in mind, December is the early part of the winter when bears should be hibernating. And in this part of the world, it's still the northern hemisphere, and therefore, this is the beginning of the winter. Brown bears are going to start hibernating the end of September, early October, and generally will start to wake up in March and April. But sometimes if the bear didn't get enough food, or if there's changes in the weather that are different than what most years should be expected, these animals will get out early, and when they get out, they are ready to eat. Unfortunately, in December, this means that most of the things that a brown bear are going to eat aren't around. It's not time for them to wake up yet. They're going to have to alter how they feed. And sometimes that means picking up something easy. This particular large brown bear was seen at a storehouse eating things it shouldn't, eating things belonging to humans. So some of the workers shot and wounded it, and this made the bear very angry. The bear realized he couldn't go back to this exact site or he risked death, so he had to find something even easier than rooting through stores in a warehouse. What he did instead was go into somebody's home, eat a child, the babysitter, and in the subsequent days, several more people. On December 9th, the bear attacked a home of the Otta family. This is where it slew the baby, their babysitter, and then fled. In response, the panicked villagers armed themselves and gathered to hunt the bear and protect nearby homes. But this was a tricky bear, and that night he managed to slip by and trick pursuing hunters and attack another household. The injuries were fatal, and this bear decided to try and eat some of the corpses. Night after night, this bear ransacked homes looking for people, but by December 13th, the bear had met its match, a 60-person search party that was formed to hunt the bear down and protect their village. The bear, a 9-foot, 750-pound male, was killed, and the terror was over. Let me know in the comment section what your favorite story was. Should we do a part 2? Because there's lots more animals that have eaten humans, and give me your ideas for next week's video. I do videos every weekend, so I'll see you in the next one.